Hey marketers, it's Dr. Harvey. We are talking about chapter 5 today. This chapter is on continuing in the section of exploratory research design and kind of looking at more specific design. This chapter, in chapter 5, we are looking at qualitative research. Okay, so lots of things to discuss here. Just to sort of couch where we are in our framework, we are looking at primary data. In chapter 4, we're looking at secondary data. Okay. So we are looking at primary data and then going down one level, we are looking at qualitative primary data today. So if you compare qualitative to quantitative, again, there's a video posted on Blackboard that looks at the differences between qualitative and quantitative research. We are focusing on qualitative here. So we're looking at kind of those underlying motivations. We're not looking at a ton of people. We're not trying to collect thousands of surveys. We're probably interviewing somewhere between 20 and 40-ish people. The data collection is unstructured. We're looking for words, right? Qualitative, it's not numbers based. It's not statistical. We're not going to run any type of statistical analyses. And really, we're working on developing an initial understanding. Sometimes we do see, usually qualitative research comes before the quantitative research. Sometimes we do see quantitative research come first, and then there'll be qualitative research to help. Maybe there's something surprising about the results of the quantitative research. And so we want to see if we can figure out what the underlying motivations or reasons were for those results. So when we look at qualitative research, so we're just keep going down our little tree here, we're going to have both direct and indirect qualitative procedures. The indirect ones are disguised, and where we're not asking a direct question about how do you feel about the introduction of self-checkout at most grocery stores. Instead, we would ask a projective question, which I'll show you an example of in a minute. Probably some of the most common qualitative research procedures that you'll hear about, especially for firms, are going to be focus groups and depth interviews. So focus groups are going to be 8 to 10 typically people in a room together. A moderator asks them guiding questions, and they just really have a conversation about what that topic is. And then in-depth interviews are going to be more one-on-one with an interviewer and an interviewee, a respondent, answering questions about whatever that particular topic is. So here's one way that they do. I just think this is a fun thing to see. When possible, at some of the big market research firms, they would have an area like this where you could have a focus group and actually have observers on the other side of the one-way mirror being able to monitor things like body language, tone of voice, and what they're actually saying. So when we do focus groups, we're going to be looking for specific people. We need to develop an outline for the moderator so they can ask the right guiding questions. And then when we analyze it, we're actually going to record it, typically video and audio recording, so that we can go back and look at all the things they said without having to remember it, of course. We like focus groups, particularly one of the big ones is snowballing, right? One person says, oh, I really like self-checkout because I don't have to wait in line as long. And someone says, oh yeah, I love how they have more than one. It seems like they have so many self-checkouts open all at the same time. And then person C says, no, I don't like that because now they only have one real person who is checking people out. And I really hate having to choose between something that stresses me out, the self-checkout, and a really long line, and it just continues, right? There's that snowballing effect. People feed off something else, something someone else said. That is a really big benefit. We can also get a lot of data relatively quickly because we have 10 people in the room. So we're getting data from 10 people in 1 to 3 hours instead of having to interview each individual person for maybe an hour. Okay. This video is posted on Blackboard. I just wanted to put it here so I could just plug it so you guys will watch it. One of the main interviewing techniques, so moving on to interviewing, is laddering. So this is where think of a ladder, right? So we're going from product characteristics all the way down to the user characteristic. So maybe we're asking people about why do you like wide body aircraft? Eventually they say, oh, well, I can get more work done. Oh, well, tell me more about that. Well, I think I can accomplish more. Oh, well, what is the result of that? And then eventually it's like you feel good about yourself. So what they get from all of that, from this interview that probably took, 30 minutes to get from wide body aircrafts to feel good about yourself. Over time, if you see a lot of people say that, you might be able to discern we should create an advertising theme that's something like you'll feel good about yourself when you fly our airline because you are the boss. And then you could go test that more specifically with quantitative research. We can also use hidden issue questioning. So instead of focusing on these like socially shared values that we might want to use for this overarching marketing theme or product characteristics, we're really looking at the more personal things, right? Hidden issues, sore spots, things that are like deeply felt personal concerns. And so maybe in these types of interviews, what we end up with is an advertising theme of like, we want to communicate that we're aggressive, it's this high status, and there's a heritage of the airline, that there's a long-standing history. Okay. I'm going to encourage you to read about symbolic analysis in the textbook, and then also review this focus group versus depth interviews, just summary table that gives you a really good place to study and also a good comparison between these two. Then we have projective techniques that I mentioned at the beginning. So this is still an unstructured form of questioning. It's not direct. We're not saying, how do you feel about wide-winged aircraft bodies? Instead, we're looking at, I'll show an example in a minute. We're getting people to just give us some sense of their motivations or their attitudes or just how they feel about this issue without outright coming and asking them. Okay. So you've probably heard about this before, like a word association, where you have, here's a list of words. I'm going to ask you, I'm going to give you one at a time, and then I'll give you a word, and then you respond with the first word that comes to mind. Right? Like I might say, Spartanburger's baseball team, and then you would respond with whatever the first thing was that came to mind. Okay. And we would ask you about, maybe we're actually asking about baseball, but we might ask you about a garden or some other off-topic or neutral terms, just so that people aren't trying to, they're not like, oh, I know what they're asking me about. I'm going to give them what I think is the right answer. We call that a social bias. Okay. So then we look at, all right, how often, what are the most frequently used words? How frequently are they used? Did it take someone a really long time to think of something? Do people just not have anything to respond to? What does that mean? So here's a couple of examples. You see what Mrs. M said, versus what Mrs. C said. Then we have sentence completion. Okay, so a person who shops at Sears is. Right, so I might say a student who graduates from the Johnson College of Business and Economics is whatever you just thought, right? And then we at the college level could take that data and figure out how do students feel about the graduates, and is it good, is it bad, how can we change it, so on and so forth. Okay. So this can be helpful, especially when we have like sensitive topics, or maybe it's like a controversial topic. Here you can see another summary table. I'm not going to go over all these again, but I would again encourage you to, all of these summary tables are just so valuable for studying. The text of the textbook, the paragraphs are going to be really great for details and examples, but these summary charts are just fantastic for really understanding the differences between the different types of research, or whatever it is that we're comparing, and how they rate on different criteria. All right, so when we analyze qualitative data, we are going to first reduce the data. So we may have asked a bunch of questions and we realized later that some of them really, we didn't get the answer. The answers were not valuable for the problem we're trying to solve. So we may set that aside. There may be something we want to emphasize right now. A lot of times we'll develop some sort of visual interpretation of the data to help us really just visualize the relationships between the data, help us see patterns. And then we try to draw some conclusions, and oftentimes that leads us to some quantitative research. Focus groups and depth interviews are also being conducted sort of to some extent through social media. So if you think about like private online communities, which we typically call a brand community, maybe a company creates like a fan group on Facebook, right? And they ask you some filter questions before you can join the group. You can't just join it willy-nilly. They have to approve you. And so now they can ask you questions, or they can monitor that Facebook group, and it's like an ongoing focus group, just on and on and on, right? As long as people are willing to participate. Okay. We could also look at participant blogs. So where we actually recruit participants instead of coming in and like sitting for a couple of hours in a focus group. We would ask them to, we'd say, hey, we made a blog for you. We just need you to type in it for a couple weeks. 1 to 4 weeks is pretty typical. Okay. So one thing, here's a service that I think is really interesting. For my father-in-law or my mother-in-law and my parents, for Christmas last year, we got them this service called Storyworth, I think is what it's called. And every week it sends the person, my parents and my mother-in-law, some questions about their life. And so at the end of a year, it'll take all their answers and any pictures they've submitted and create it into this like beautiful hardbound book that can be passed on through generations. Okay. I'm super excited about it, but I also think from a marketing research standpoint, it would be really fascinating to look at the answers to all those questions and perhaps be able to get some really interesting insights. I think this is particularly focused on baby boomers, but I'm sure there's a lot of other people that use it, but really looking at and better understanding different demographics through their stories that they tell. Other projective techniques that we might be able to use on social media would be things like, showing, analyzing photos that you might post, and looking for tags or labels that photographers put on there, looking at comments on the pictures, looking if you maybe even could look at Facebook pictures posted on Facebook and look at, now that we have more than likes on Facebook, look at the different responses that there were on social media. Ethical issues definitely could be issues with privacy. You absolutely have to make sure that people have agreed to come in and do all of these different techniques with like your focus groups, your depth interviews, and sometimes your projective techniques, depending on how you do it, right? You might be videotaping people and you might be recording their audio. And so you absolutely have to get their consent for that before you do that. And that is it for chapter 5, my friends. We are going to get into descriptive research design next time. So those 2 chapters, chapters 4 and 5, are the ones that focus on our exploratory research. So we have syndicated and secondary, as well as qualitative research that fit within that broader category. All right, thanks everyone.